Hi, welcome to ThreatTraq Essentials. We're going to take a look at some lessons that we can learn from this week's ThreatTraq stories. I'm here with Ganesh Kasina. Welcome, Ganesh.
Hey, Don. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about the stories we covered this week. You brought us an interesting story about a botnet that's making its own honeypots. Tell me about it.
The botnet we are talking about was a DHTrap. It's basically honeypots, which is used by various security researchers to understand various exploits, attack vectors, and maybe come up with, countermeasures. But in this scenario, what this botnet does is taking that exact same concept and utilizing for their nefarious actings. So,
Ganesh, is there any advice or takeaway message from a story like this?
It's not per se like an advisor, but the takeaway is any powerful tool can be used by anyone else. It's basically in the hands of the actor. For example, a good security researcher will be using the same tool to protect, whereas a bad actor could be using for nefarious actors. The concept here is, I think, one should be very cognizant of how we are able to use the tools and come up with some actions about it. So the takeaway is any tool can be, any tactic could be raised by anyone. I think we have to learn as much as possible and try to protect as much as possible.
Let's talk about Chris's story. Recently, we covered the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability, and of course, it's only a matter of time before somehow ransomware comes into that story, which it has. Tell me about it.
Yeah, Chris has a story about how quickly a specific vulnerability has been turned into potential ransomware. The time it's taking from basically proof of concept to 0 day to, I'll reword it, 0 day to proof of concept to the full-blown ransomware activity. I think the time is shrinking. In the sense, I think if anybody is having any sort of vulnerable application, servers, devices, anything, it's always good to patch as quickly as possible, as it demonstrates the time it takes to basically full-blown into good additional threat activity is very minimal. And every day, the threat surface attack the timeline is shrinking.
Okay, let's talk about, a vulnerability that's been sitting around in Linux for many years that's been uncovered.
The story has 3 different variants, and some SCSI controllers can be leveraged to give any local user, basically give root privileges, which is equivalent to admin privileges in Windows. The reason is it's not as critical as the other story, which Chris brought to us. But nevertheless, it's a reminder that old vulnerabilities exist and they need to be patched as soon as possible also. In this scenario, anything connected to SCSI devices or drivers should be vulnerable, and I think there is a good decision tree chart which will help sysadmins to come up with solutions whether the devices, the versions are vulnerable or not. So never think any vulnerability, any old vulnerability will exist, but anytime anything can come up and maybe that may provide attack vector. But in this scenario, it's more like awareness and maybe quickly to patch those vulnerabilities. And I think in this scenario, the various Unix-based vendors, they work so diligently and quickly to come up with a patch. So that's a good takeaway. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for all that great information and advice, Ganesh. And those of you watching, if you want to keep up on great info and advice like this, please like and subscribe below. And if you want to take a deeper look at any of these stories, click on the playlist below. We'll see you next time.